Hi folks, and welcome to Schick Happens. In today's episode, I want to talk about the 1980s. Now, manufacturing of me began in late 1969 in the parent factory, and I was born in mid-1970. Now, while I do remember some of the 70s from age 0 to 10, I don't remember a lot of it. And in the 1990s, half of that, or more than half of that, encompassed a military career. And then into the 2000s, I felt like I was just getting old and time was flying by. But what I do recall and am very fond of the most was the 1980s, from age 10 to age 20. Kind of a good time frame in your life to experience a particular decade. And that's what I want to discuss in this episode of Schick Happens. Remembering the 1980s. Now there are going to be a couple of channels that I tag at the end of this video. I'll mention them a little bit later in the decades that I want them to do a video on in remembering. Hey Schickster, I'm doing a video on remembering the 1980s. You remember the 80s, don't you? No? I'm sure he does. He just doesn't want to admit it. Now, I've been wanting to put a video together like this for quite some time. The other day when I was poking around in the analytics section of my YouTube channel, I went to, I think it was the demographics or average age of the viewers that view my channel. And about 75% of them were between the ages of 45 and 55. So I figured, why not? Most of my viewers will at least remember the 80s or appreciate this video. And looking at this stereo, one of the first things that snaps back in my mind was the Walkmans in the 1980s. That was a big thing, and it seemed like everyone had one. And you were running the cassettes in them. CDs hadn't been invented yet, and you probably looked kind of foolish carrying around a turntable. But I love those Walkmans. They were pretty cool. And speaking of the cassettes, Def Leppard On Through the Night was the VCR tapes. And I do remember the big thing in the 80s was when you went to rent one of these, you needed to rewind it before you returned it. Or there was some stiff penalties, or at least it seemed like that back then. I believe around August of 1981 is when MTV launched. And I was at an age where I just started getting into music. I had a couple older sisters and an older brother that listened to music all the time. So I was hearing it myself, kind of what the popular tunes were. And when MTV came out, especially in the early 80s, it was pretty cool just watching video after video after video after video. I think that's changed a little bit with MTV, but I do remember when they just played music. As painful as it is to admit, there was also a brief period in the mid-'80s when I was always in the search for cardboard. Huge sheets of cardboard. And you're probably wondering why. Well, that was for the breakdance floor. Breakdancing was huge there for a while. As long as you could find the accompanying parachute pants and correct jacket to go with it to complete the ensemble. But yes, I went through a phase of wanting to breakdance there for a little bit. Fortunately, it didn't last long. Computers certainly were a present part of high school, junior high in the 80s when I was in school. We certainly didn't have a computer at home. Back then they were about the size of a refrigerator. We were limited to an Atari or a little Coleco machine for our entertainment. But we didn't spend a lot of time inside. My brother and I spent a lot of time outdoors, enjoying our time away from school and over the summer. Now, I'm not certain when the Pet Rock came out, but I do remember when this launched. You remember these, the Rubik's Cube, and how insanely popular they were in the 80s? I know you can still find them in the store today, but this was quite the thing in the 80s when it came out, that's for sure. You know, trying to recall memories from the 80s, it's probably the most vivid in my memory as a child or a teenager or just getting into adulthood. I remember at the beginning of 1980 I had a bicycle accident and I needed to go in for stitches. I didn't want to, and I was hoping by the time I got to the hospital, the doctor, and I don't remember his name, but he kind of looked like this. But I begged and pleaded with him not to get stitches. Of course, I didn't win. I ended up getting 3 or 4 stitches. But that kind of opened up the 80s for me. Now, towards the end of the 80s, when I was a senior in high school, I had a biology or a science teacher. I don't remember his name, but he kind of looked like this. And while I don't remember a single thing he taught during that class, I do remember him on day 1 saying, if you remember one thing that I've taught in this class for the rest of your life, it was worth teaching. That's the only thing I remember. Now, a minute ago I had mentioned computers in school, kind of at their infancy stage compared to what we are today with computers at school. But in speaking of technology, the cell phone still hadn't been invented yet. Sure, they had car phones or these massive things, but at the tail end of my career of high school, what became or started becoming popular, not a lot of people had them, was the little beepers, where when you get a call from somebody, or it was kind of like the early version of text and a phone number would come in. I do remember that. But I think my fondest memory of school in the 1980s was the rectangular pizzas that they had for school lunch. You just don't make them like that anymore. I just don't ever remember a pizza tasting that good. And sometimes I would eat 3 or 4 of them for lunch. I think they were maybe 50 cents a piece. Why can't they make them anymore? And that's going to do it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did putting this together. I was very fond of the 1980s. It's a big part of my life. And featured in this video was Mike from BonedaddyToo as the science teacher, and I'm tagging him to do a similar video on remembering the 1970s. Also pictured in this video was Randy from Father and Sons Fishing. I'm going to tag him to do a video on remembering the 1990s. So I'm hoping they can come up with something and put together a good video on those decades. Certainly look forward to watching what they can put together. And I will leave links to their channels down below in the description. And that's going to about wrap it up for this latest and greatest Schick Happens video, remembering the 1980s. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you stick around because I'm going to continue to put some videos out every Friday. And I hope you enjoyed the Schickster's appearance in this video. It's been a while since he's been around, but there'll be some more of him for sure coming down the road.